Blog Talk Radio. Welcome to the Dark Matters radio show with the Sorceress Cagliastro, blood sorceress, pioneer, and necromancer in the hands of nine, for a discussion on all topics relating to blood sorcery, necromancy, the science of sorcery, and related work of manipulation of energy. Each week, the Sorceress Cagliastro and Chris Rogue Ostrowski will explore topics designed to reveal what cannot be seen. Tonight's topic is possession. We'll focus on how to tell what possession is, how to distinguish who exactly has taken over, and the possible methods of removal. To reach us, dial 347-945-7383 and press 1 if you want to ask a question, or join us in the Dark Matters chat room. And now, here's the Sorceress Cagliastro and Chris Rogue Ostrowski.
Thank you, Mary. Good evening, Chris. How are you tonight?
Oh, not bad. How's everybody doing?
Good. Good. Thanks for your intro, Mary. That was great. Tonight we're going to be talking about possession, and the show is going to be an hour for at least, the next couple of weeks through the summer as we get a feel for how many questions we're going to have to field and whatnot, and there's been a lot of feedback. It's been great. So we're going to do an hour show for the next couple of weeks, and then we will expand an hour and a half maybe back to 2 hours. Fluid, but it's always at 8 o'clock, so the ride will take you at least 60 minutes. What I want to talk about tonight is possession, because this is a huge topic. People come to me every day. I get emails every day. They think they're possessed. They know someone who's possessed. And what I want to do tonight is, if I can, break down a little bit of the myth of what that is, and talk about whether you are possessed by a disincarnate or a demon, and it's different. And, of course, we have a very short period of time, and I'm very interested in people's questions. But if you want more about this, then just go to my site and jump in on one of the classes on demons and disincarnate and possession. But right now, let's take this opportunity to talk about what possession is. And if you will bear with me, then I will just make a couple of statements about what that means. There are two kinds of ways that the disincarnate and demons can involve themselves in the experience called making a decision about taking over the workings of the human body and mind. And, of course, there are gray areas and plenty of them. But basically, when it comes to the human body and mind, there's inhabitation and possession. And inhabitation is when a disincarnate or a demon, and there is a difference, we'll talk about that as we move on, gets a hold of someone in a way that is transient. They come in and out. They use that person's energy at their disposal when they want it. They have some reason to manipulate themselves into that person in some way and be part of that. And it's fluid, comes and goes. I don't necessarily think it's always a bad thing. And we'll talk about that too, if you like. And then there is full possession, when the entity that is entered has greater command through their own energy, through their own power, whether it's a demon or a disincarnate, of the individual who is the human that's living at the moment and having this experience. So we look forward to questions tonight about this and about the difference. And if we have time, I'll do a little bit of discussion on the fact that sometimes demons are good to be this close to, and how on occasion, we can use our own energy to, in a sense, possess demons. It is reversible in the other direction. Chris, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, from my experience, I have at times used, I would say, a demon's energy to my own ends with things that I needed to have done. Whether it was to enhance some kind of spell, and I really hate to use that word, but I don't have nothing better to use, or some other practice, maybe even if I'm doing like a soul retrieval, use it as a guide to protect me as I'm going through. The Norse used to call it like a fetch, to make sure you're protected on the other side. I know when I was sick already, I've used it to help heal myself from the inside. I don't like to do it a lot because it does take a toll, and I really don't want to owe that much to them.
So are you saying that your use of demons is in a sense of self-possession, that you call them in to possess you and to be part of your working. Okay, so that's another entire category, and not one for the faint of heart, I must say, Chris. So good work with that, because Mary, you have thoughts on that?
Well, as I was listening to both of you talk, I think it's interesting how we take these topics and we kind of bust out what people think or what they see in the media or the news, and how possession or creation of possessions have gone wrong. And I think really this topic is going to be interesting for us tonight, because it's kind of looking at the picture of how people do get possessed, how a proper removal is important, how to tell the difference between the two, because you can't approach each one the same. So I think we're going to have a really good discussion tonight about that, and help people really realize what they're all about and how to see them.
Well, that's true, Mary, because the variables are countless. Every human being is different in terms of their energy, and every demon is different in terms of theirs. And if we talk for a minute specifically about demon possession, which is different than possession by the disincarnate, then we know that the energy comes from chaos. It comes from exhaustion in terms of the energy of the demon is spiraling out of control often, and they would like to be able to find a place to settle. And also, it is my understanding from demons themselves that they are all looking for the same thing. They are all looking to become incarnate in some way. They are all looking to become materialized. They are all looking to become usable, to find a usable physical form. And in that effort, then, the possession by a disincarnate is a different thing than, by a demon rather, is a different thing than a disincarnate, because the disincarnate are living in a memory. They want to reflect back on what it felt like to be alive, so they utilize the possession differently. And, there is definitely an escalation in possession. And it's interesting to me because I'm seeing a lot more younger people, even children, in a state of possession. People are calling me about that all the time. And it's very important to know how to do these removals, because the possession can be a very long-term thing. Someone can struggle with this for as much as years based on how viral the entity is and how much they're taking from the person. So when you hear people say that they take demons in to do an exorcism, that's a lot of language. That's very different than what Chris said, which is taking a demon in for his own purposes and utilizing it in that way. But when you go and when you approach an exorcism, and when you talk about possession, you have to really talk about exorcism, because it really is the human flip side. Then when you go in there, the job is not for you to take the demon inside yourself. The job is for you to get the demon to release from its individual that it's holding captive. This is not the final scene in The Exorcist. That's not really how it works. And, it doesn't, exorcism, possession does not belong to the Catholic Church. I want to be really clear about that, because if the demon that you're dealing with doesn't care about the power of Christ, it's not really going to compel him. So, so there you go. We've talked about that before, but just to be clear. So, when you're dealing with possession, this idea that you come in and take the demon into you and then run around and get it out of you and move it to something else, if you have that kind of talent, excellent. I meet very few who can take a demon in that is in a state of chaos. It's like taking in a person who's in a very high level of panic, taking that within yourself, and then being able to turn around and remove it, which would not really necessarily be the case, because the chaos from that person, in this case the demon, is inside of the person who is doing the exorcism. So deflecting, removal, breaking the bonds, these things are much more successful and much more realistic. Chris?
I agree. With what I do, it is, like I said, it's very taxing on me. As far as the amount of more possessions now, I'm kind of wondering, is it that there is more, or we're just seeing more? Is it just because it's not hidden in a closet anymore like it used to be? And people just try to deal with it back then, like, we'll go talk to the priest. If the priest says you're nuts, they lock you away in the bedroom. People are going outside of that area now because they're finding out that there is more out there, that there are people that can help them that doesn't have to be quote-unquote clergy.
Right, sure.
Or is there, that there just happens to be more demons now than what there used to be?
Well, I think that a couple of those things are going on, Chris. I think that you're absolutely right, that people are reaching out past the plastic thing and the black collar and saying, well, that guy hasn't ever been able to help me with anything else. Why should he be able to help me with this? So as a person who does exorcism, the person who deals with possession, the person who does the relaxing of inhabitations or the discussion of habitation, and we'll talk about that a little bit, I can tell you that I do think that there are more possessions now. And as years go by, I see more and more of this. Is it something you can calculate? I don't know. Is it just because more people know me and they come to me? Perhaps that's it as well. But demons are an amalgam of energy. They are an amalgam of difficult, complex structures of energy that are related to things like stress, anxiety, worry, guilt, pain of all kinds. And because we are living in such a high-stress world, and because there is such a desire for a sense of immediate gratification, these kinds of energies butt up against each other, energy working best against resistance. So I think people will let in things that they might not have been so open to before. Mary, what do you think? Are there any questions in the chat room about this?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. I'll start off with Victor's, which I thought was a great question. So let me grab that because it scrolled right by me. He asked, is possession volunteerism or victimization?
Really great question. The answer is yes. And let me tell you why. Let me tell you why the answer is yes. Understand that I'm a person who deals with demons and the disincarnate all the time. And I know that they have a certain, I don't know what other word to use other than right to be here. They are as much a part of the equation as the living, breathing human being. So many times when people become possessed by both demons or the disincarnate, they are allowing in themselves an opening of an energy, an opening of a portal, a presentation of willingness, even if it's at a subconscious level, that says, I'm open to this exchange, to this experience. And when this happens, it is not always a negative thing. Very often people's abilities in all kinds of areas are freed by this other entity coming into them and taking away whatever sort of boundaries existed. People sometimes flourish in their art or in their life abilities. They learn things that they couldn't learn before. I've seen this dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of times. So in that sense, it is volunteerism. And it can also very well be victimization, because one can be a naturally vulnerable individual. And just like we talked about the other night, we talked about, I don't remember if it was on the radio in one of my classes, we talked about how one who looks vulnerable is more likely to be picked on in the living world. It is very similar. And the difference is what is vulnerability to a demon? And I think vulnerability to a demon is someone who is not trapped in the boundaries of some sort of set of rules that are unbendable. So the answer, as I said, is yes. Thoughts, Chris?
Do you think that I'm just bouncing this around. If you look at a teenager that grows up in a house that's really strict, do you think that they are more likely to it or they're less likely to it?
I think that they are more likely to become into the category of volunteerism because they are in a place of searching. The energy of searching is a very powerful energy. When you meet someone who is completely stayed in their ways, no matter what it is that they're stayed in their ways about, you can sense that. The opposite is true as well, and you can sense the opposite. Maybe not as clearly, but you can tell when you meet someone who's got sort of a porous way about them. They're wide open. They want to know all kinds of things. They're very interested in everything that people say to them, and they're always searching for new information, and they're very excited about that. People who grow up, children, teenagers, adults, who grow up in these hands tied behind their backs kind of lifestyles, have to suppress the natural desire for that their entire lives. So when the door flies open, it starts to really fly open, and many doors start to fly open. So I think that there is definitely more of a chance of involvement in possession and in habitation, maybe even more so in habitation, where the relationship is not as permanent, but is definitely as important, in people who have been oppressed in any way. I mean, I look at how my daughter's growing up versus how all of her friends are growing up, and it is very, very different. We have a very open communication. She hears things other children would not hear in terms of being around sort of a think tank all the time, people talking about science and demons and all manner of things that would not even be mentioned in other households. I think at the end of the day, if you look at how the pendulum swings, she is more secure, more solid, less easy to penetrate than somebody who's never been able to ask the questions out loud. Thoughts?
That's what it seems like. I mean, everything you see on TV, you got to believe, or you discard 90%, and what's ever left, you believe half of that. But they're always showing it's the people with the least intelligence that this is happening to. And what I've found, it's not so much, and like you said, it's not so much that you're not intelligent or there's an ignorance, it's just that there's, I guess, ignorance to the outside world is what it is. You got to believe something or you'll believe anything.
Chris, if you want to look at it that way, 1,000 years ago I was involved in dealing with, not actually 1,000, although it feels that way, dealing with a nightclub in New York City and helping sort of determine what it would be and build its image from the beginning out. And as I watched it grow, it occurred to me that the patrons who were sort of the most flamboyant in their appearance and exchange and most willing to try anything were the ones who had, escaped a small town or gotten out of a religion that was holding tight to them. And I'm saying this with no value judgment one way or the other. I mean, it is what it is, and that's really true. But if you equate that, the suppression of knowledge, if you equate the idea that asking a question is somehow connected to, going to hell, whatever that means, I don't know what that means, then the second you bust out of that, you're wide open to anything that wants to come and touch you. And this is more to the point of what you were saying. And it isn't really an issue of intelligence. First of all, anything you see on TV, the way to cure that is there's a plug in the wall, you should pull it, and then you don't have to see any of that anymore. That's sort of always the sensationalized version. I've been offered more TV shows than any human being who doesn't have a TV show. I'm sure of it. I'm sure if I put up a Facebook page and said how many people don't have a TV show who have been offered dozens and dozens of TV shows. And the thing is that most of the time what they want me to do is, like spin saucers on one finger or be the Addams Family lady or, cut the heads off of things or all sorts of craziness. So whatever goes on TV is somebody's version of what they think an audience wants to see. An exorcism can be extraordinarily boring. This is something nobody talks about. I sometimes sit silently with a person and hold their hand until I can talk to the demon or the disincarnate. And after a negotiation, sometimes completely silent, because my discussion is with the entity, it leaves. And I, hate to be so boring, but I am 1,000% effective. So there is very rarely the throwing of holy water and the raising of letters on the skin. A person in a state of full possession is struggling at the subatomic level, the level where their emotions, their thoughts, their sense of who they are has been usurped in some way. And sometimes you have to sit with the bad guy and fight it out, and sometimes you can negotiate. That's a very, very real way to do it. That's why I don't film them, You know, a lot of people who do exorcisms film it and they want to show the pictures, and I don't do that. And I suppose if I did, you know, those pictures would garner a lot of funds for me, but I'm not interested in selling pain. What I am interested in is that when someone calls me and they say, you know, 10 years ago you did this for me and now I know somebody else and you're the first person I thought of, that's when it works. That's when I know that it's right. But sometimes it is extraordinarily, it's a glacial pace and you're sitting quietly, and sometimes there's more than that. But it's all matters on who's in the room, both on the physical plane and on the less physical plane. Mary, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we have some folks talking in the chat room, and I think one of the things, I'll give you a comment first and then a question. But Victor had mentioned that the shows that he's done have been contrived and slanted to be sensational and garner ratings. So I think a lot of what comes up about possession, which is what I was going to lead to with the question, is that, you know, it shows all the sensationalism. Like you said, if you were filmed, you know, just sitting with someone and the amount of time it takes, negotiation, it would be boring. So is there good possession? Is there is there things that are done where it's actually, quote, good to be possessed?
Yeah, there are. And let me answer that in two ways. First of all, thank you for that, Victor, because at the end of the day, what I never want to be is a showman. You know, I present the material. I teach constantly. You know, I probably talk about this in my sleep if I ever get any. And the fact is that this is what I do, and I do it all the time, and I do it passionately, and I talk about it, and I'll present any materials I can. But what I won't do is I won't sensationalize the work. You know, my books are never filled with horrific stories of the darkness unless I'm writing fiction, and then that's a different thing. So, yes, there are good possessions, and there's two kinds of good possessions in my experience and in my understanding of the question. There's a kind of possession when someone calls upon someone from another time or, you know, even recently disincarnate, and we're talking about possession by a disincarnate for the purpose of this moment in time, and reaches out for them to gain their skills. I had a client who said to me, can you help me contact a particular painter, not a particularly famous one. It took a while for me to understand who she was talking about, who became disincarnated about 170 years ago, and she wanted to understand through that person how he painted a certain thing. And what we did was we communicated with him, and she invited him to take her body in his possession and show her hands what to do. This was a magnificent moment. And seeing that was an unbelievable thing. This was a woman who had been painting and studying painting and all this for 37 years, and she never was able to do this one thing, and then she was. So I would say that's good possession. It was controlled. It was more than just bringing someone forward, a disincarnate forward and talking to them. We do this all the time. But this was a disincarnate actually being invited into her personhood and putting this technique into her hands, which she could then do after the possession. So in that sense, that's a brilliantly positive and good possession. And in terms of demons, being possessed by demons, sometimes it's not that intentional, but what happens is a possession by a demon can sometimes take away the restrictions the person has put on themselves. It can sort of break them out a little bit. Sometimes people are very, very repressed by their lives, and the presence of a demon suddenly makes them able to do things, get up on stage or say no, even just to say no. So there are many times when bringing a disincarnate or a demon into your personhood by possession, even by inhabitation, which is less permanent or less invested, is a very good thing. And utilizing it that way with somebody who can help you with it is a very, very powerful exchange. I mean, this is sorcery we're talking about. We're talking about blood sorcery. We're talking about a very visceral kind of sorcery that's been done since humans stood upright, having these exchanges. We're not talking about any kind of lightweight magic here. So if you want to have that kind of exchange, it's available, but it is definitely a good thing if it's well handled. Did I answer the question, Mary?
I think it does. I think it would be the words that people would use a lot of times is, quote, channeling instead of possession. But I think, it's sort of the same, not quite the same, but it is kind of stepping out of the way and letting yourself be guided by something else. It's just in a more intentional way.
Well, I think it's different than channeling.
Okay.
Because when you start channeling, you're stating, I'm going to spend a few minutes with you. When you talk about inhabitation, which is the lesser version of possession, you're saying, I'm going to trust you to come inside of my vessel, and it is my desire that this has an end point, but I know that I can't control that necessarily at the end of the day. So it is definitely more of an exchange of trust, I think, than channeling. That we're talking about semantics here, I think. So I think that if those semantics are acceptable to listeners, or they can understand that for me those are different words, then that's the thing. The relationship is much more potent. What do you think, Mary?
I think it's good to make the distinction, because I think people would use those two words interchangeably. So I think it's important to make that distinction. Absolutely. We have another question from the chat room from Darren, and he says, the terminology that the sorceress has created for the various levels or extents of possession is so interesting. Inhabitation versus possession and attachment. They are so unique to the methodology that you've developed. Are there any other types of possession? He asked.
Yeah, thank you, Darren. If you mean, are there any other entities, first let me address that. I firmly grasp what I see. And I see that the disincarnate involve themselves in attachment, inhabitation, possession, and I see that demons involve themselves in those three kinds of possession. I don't have, people talk about the shadow people and all these other things. I think that there are two categories. There are things that are demons, but in the sense that they are amalgams of energies, and there are things that used to be living human beings. So I don't see another area so specifically in who or what else involves themselves in these things. But I will say, and thank you, Darren, for the acknowledgement on the terminology, because when you teach this work, or when you call it the science of sorcery, which is what it is, being able to replicate the data is vital. I don't address this work like a spontaneous moment of sorcery. I address this work as a body of work that someday others better at this than I'll ever be, will be able to take all that data, put it together, and do much more with it. So when I look at it, when I approach it, that's always my position. There are these sorts of attachments, maybe a sort of subcategory of attachments, where an entity is involved with a particular aspect of a person. Right now, I have a client whose eyes are very involved in a disincarnate who is not letting go of the use of his eyes. And it is very specific. He feels all the tension in his eyes. He loses control visually. All manner of things attached to that specifically. So I think that there are types of attachments that are so specific because the disincarnate or the demon is very interested in utilizing that aspect of our human vessels. So I would say that, that category exists as well. And then there's also the existence of an attachment or even an inhabitation where there doesn't feel like there's a physical component, where one's thoughts are being used, when one is changed in a way or being utilized in a way almost as if they're being brainwashed. So the areas of attachment and inhabitation, of course, can be compartmentalized in that way. But the idea that if you don't get it out soon, it will expand is not necessarily the case. The man I've been dealing with, who it appears that this demon is very interested in looking through his eyes and using his eyes, has been going through this for years. I just recently met him. And one of the interesting things is he's not sure he wants to let it go. What he wants is a relationship with the demon so that he can say, I can't do this right now, which is a very high-frequency, powerful direction to go with this kind of thing. Thoughts? I know that's big.
Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, that's what I just thought. Yeah, that's really big. Now, when you said about the thoughts and things like that, and one of the things that I make sure when I hear something like that somebody's telling me that somebody is talking to them, I want to make sure that they're of the right frame of mind.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think that's a big problem that people don't realize, that you got to make sure that what you're dealing with is authentic, that it isn't just somebody has issues and this is what they're blaming it on.
Yes, that's very true. That happens a lot. I mean, I often mention this one client that I had a number of years ago who lived on a Civil War battlefield. And for years, he said, I'm hearing like 4 voices. Then he was medicated to the point where he was pretty much bedridden. It was a really horrible way to live. And finally he called me, 35 doctors later, he called me and he said, you know what, I don't care. Just tell me what this is. And I sat with him for hours and hours and hours, and I wrote down the things that I was hearing, and he wrote down the things that he was hearing, and they were the same. So unless we were both in a state of psychosis, which we were not, the diagnosis, if you will, was third-party interaction. In this case, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth-party interaction. So it is very important. I mean, people come to me all the time and they say, oh, I'm possessed, I'm crazy, and I say to them, well, tell me about your history. But I have the ability to see and hear the demon and the disincarnate who are doing the work. So I have this added, I guess it's perk or ability, to not have to say, well, are you sure it's not psychosis? Are you sure it's not this? Because I can tell from the point of view of the one doing the possession where we are in the situation. So that's why, for me, sometimes the work is extraordinarily efficient, because I can go in and say, well, there is or there is not an entity here. And this is one of the things that we're going to do on, I would say, in a room full of interested parties when we get to the blood project. So, Mary, at the end, let's talk about that for a minute, if you can remember to throw that in.
Sure. So, I think there's been a lot of chatter in the chat room, and I wanted to bring up this point because I thought it was an interesting one. So there's been this discussion about intention versus belief. So we kind of touched on intention a little bit as far as people who intend to use possession as, a tool. But do you have to believe that you can be possessed? Does it happen without the belief? Because a lot of people probably walk around not thinking about it at all. So do you need to have a belief, or how does belief play into possession?
Mary, do you have to have a belief that a guy's going to hit you over the head and take your wallet?
True.
Okay. So either demons and the disincarnate exist or they don't. In my experience of communicating with thousands of them, they exist. I don't believe in anything. You both know me pretty well, and you know that I feel strongly about that. If I can't see it, if I can't replicate it, it isn't real. So that's my position on the thing. Whether one believes in someone hitting them over the head or not is irrelevant. If a demon is coming to you and you appear vulnerable or interesting, which might be the case as well, or connected to someone else they have possessed, and this does happen, this definitely does happen, then it's on. And that demon is going to do what it needs to do to get inside of your vessel in a way that is particular to that demon-human combination. And it doesn't matter what you believe. I mean, you can cite scripture, and you can throw holy water on yourself, and you can spend the night sleeping on the pews in church. It's not going to matter because the demon is not religious. He doesn't care, or she doesn't care, or it doesn't care. So belief is a really irrelevant component in the equation of who involves themselves in possession and who doesn't involve themselves in possession. Thoughts?
I always like when people sit there and say that, well, if I don't believe it, it's not going to happen. Well, it's like, yeah, okay, you just keep thinking about that. Let me know how that's working out for you later.
Yeah. I don't believe in gale force winds, but I've experienced them. I don't believe in them. I mean, there they are, and they're not here because if that's how it works, then this would be an interesting way to live. Well, I don't believe in a crappy economy, so I'm not part of one. That's not really how it is. Now, the sorcery side of that says if I don't accept it and I work in my own focused way in another plane, then I'm not part of it. But it's not about believing or not believing. Demons and the disincarnate are real. We all know that they're real. And when people say they don't believe in them, then when it comes to demons, it is not uncommon for demons to say, or I don't know if they're saying it, but to have the experience called, oh yeah? Well, look at this. Some of them are very high functioning. Some of them are very able to communicate complete thoughts, complete statements. Some of them are able to plan ahead. Attending demons are able to do all manner of things. Having an attending demon with you is like having a bodyguard assistant with you all the time. They're capable of all manner of forethought and knowing what to do next. So there are many of them at that level who involve themselves in possession. Possession is not done by the lowest level, and by lowest level I mean youngest and least evolved level. It is done by those demons who can do it. And they can do it by understanding vulnerability or understanding opportunity. One has to have a certain level of cognitive evolution to understand that. That's when they do it. But it's different with disincarnate, though. Mary, do we have any questions about disincarnate specifically, or what people call ghosts or that kind of thing?
We have some good questions, yeah. I think one of the ones that kind of falls into that is, have you ever, Naomi was kind of talking about, and I think Victor also was talking about disincarnates working through them, through possession to help them transition. So one of the questions that kind of encompasses all that is, have you ever had someone follow you home?
Oh, yes, of course. Well, let me explain. You mean like after an exorcism? Oh, yes. Well, let me explain first of all that home is where I am. It's not necessarily to my house. Home is, for me, where I'm standing. And often when I leave an exorcism or a possession, now this does not mean I take it into me. This does not mean I do the wild flailing about of taking in the demon and carrying it out and all this business. I don't do any of that. My exorcisms are 100% effective and often boring. Not to the other person, of course, or to the demon, but from the third party who's observing. But often they want to talk to me. They want to continue the conversation. They want to continue the communication. In a number of exorcisms, I've actually made that part of the negotiation. I've said, the individual that you're inhabiting, and this is more so with the disincarnate because they are very melancholy. I will say to them, the individual that you're inhabiting does not have the skill set or the desire to take the information that you're offering and place it where it needs to be. For them, their filter is still packed with panic or something that some people experience that they call fear, or all manner of things that come into the I can't believe this is happening to me sort of panic package. And because I don't have that, I will often say, come, let's talk more about it, but outside of this vessel. And I've even done that with demons. So, yeah, they follow me home, but more often because it's been a negotiation that I've made.
Mm-hmm.
How many have you kept?
How many have
I said, how many have you kept?
I heard what you said. That's why I'm laughing. I have 13 attending demons. I have numbers 1 through 9. They numbered themselves that way. I did not. 9 is my most forward, high-functioning, sort of in charge attending demon. The other ones are not numbered. They're individuals. I've talked about them extensively. One is Sheeg, which is looks like a young girl or a small girl who screams all the time. And in some sort of odd exchange of physics for which I'm grateful. I seem to understand what the screams mean, almost as if there's a filter of translation that goes between the two of us. But none of them have come from working in exorcism. And I know although your question was amusing, I know you're serious. They've all come from other attachments to me personally over a long period of time. But you can't really keep them. You can spend time with them, and then you can sometimes be in a situation where you have to ask them to go. Now, the disincarnate, they have a lot to say. People become more of who they are when they become disincarnate. It's like having a few drinks. They're not in a strange state. They're just more relaxed, or they're not dealing with time, or they're not dealing with pressure and convention. Once they are settled, and once they are in a sort of graceful composure about themselves of what it means to be disincarnate. And the ones that are very used to being disincarnate, who have involved themselves in a possession, usually take some sort of purposeful stance in the thing. I've come to this person because he looked like somebody I used to know. I've attached myself to this individual because he speaks a language that I love. I've come to this person because he looks sad, and I'm sad. This is what the disincarnate tell me when they are involved in possession. When it is a demon who is making these choices, it isn't really as cut and dry as that because they have no experience being a living human being. Or they will say things more like, I want to try that. I want to know what that feels like. I love the chaos that I cause. You know, just a side note, we talk about in blood sorcery, the harvesting of blood. When you harvest blood to attract the disincarnate, it is the blood that they're attracted to. When you harvest blood to attract demons, it's the suffering of the injury because it's chaos, not because it's negative, but because it creates chaos in the human experience in the moment. So possession and inhabitation and attachment are all, they fall into those two categories in the same way. One is a little bit more intellectual and melancholy or purposeful than the other. You know, you've heard me talk a lot about this, Mary, in classes.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, no, I think it's interesting because possession, you know, we've talked a lot about that in class and things like that, and I actually wanted to back up for a second a question that we got, which might be kind of helpful, because really what's going on in the chat room now is a whole discussion about belief versus intention. There's a lot of discussion about, you know, if you believe you have the flu, then, you know, you can get the flu, and it's sort of kicking around, but I wanted to kind of bring it to a different place. You recall that someone says that they think they're possessed. So what are your basic requirements? How do you diagnose it? How do you figure that out? And then are there things that you look at and say, well, this isn't a possession, it's something else? Like, how do you figure that out?
Sure. For me, just so you know, the other category is just something else. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't do the something else. Someone else has to do the something else. So if it's something else, it's not up to me to figure out what it is. A couple of things happen. I have this wonderful opportunity called 9, and he's very helpful, and he will see demons immediately, even before I do, and say that's absolutely a demon involvement. I need to see them. I can see them I don't have to see them in person to do the diagnosis. I don't have to see them in person to see what's going on behind them. I have to see an image of them. I can sometimes do it from a photo. Sometimes I do it from an online live feed thing. And then I get to talk to them, and I listen. I do this very interesting, extremely complicated technique called listening. And I hear what they say. And then when I hear what they say, I listen for the other voices. And if I'm hearing the other voices as well, then the voices are external to their psychiatric experience and not coming from something inside of them. If they're talking to me and I see movement around them that is not them flicking their hair, then there's something else there. We start right there at the core. I just listen and observe. Now, I say that as if it's an easy thing to do, but it comes after decades of honing that and understanding how to do it and what to look for, and having these other wonderful assistants, 9, for example, And in that group of demons in particular, 2 is extraordinary at getting in there and sort of jingling it out. He's an annoyance to them, so I can raise them out of the individual a little bit or loosen their hold so I can see them better. And then, if that happens, we have to come together and remove this entity. Can an entity be removed via long distance? This is always this is often something people kick around and say, absolutely yes, absolutely no. There is no absolute answer on that, because if the entity wants to talk to me, or if the entity if I can insist that the entity talks to me, or if I work through my attending demons, then the conversation is open, and the individual does not have to be in the room. And that doesn't happen that often, but it does occasionally happen. The best case scenario is for me to sit with the vessel, the human being, because the entity has possessed the human being's vessel. So this is the battleground. And this is the thing where essentially, if you want to put air quotes around it, fighting over. The negotiation is the use of this piece of property called the individual's body, and all associated actions to that, their mind, their behavior, of course. So what we're doing is we're sitting down and diagnosing whether there is a third party and how to get it out. Sometimes it's a battle. I've gotten hurt. I've gotten pushed around. I've gotten burnt. I've had sand thrown in my eyes, all manner of things. And not always from a demon. The disincarnate can be very angry when pushed out of what feels like a new opportunity to be in a living human being. But much of it is simpler. Much of it is, what do you want? How can we help you have that experience? And then you need to let go. So much of it is handled in that way. That's really the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Simpler than you thought, but not if you don't know how to do it. That's really how that works.
Right. I was going to say simple and not simple, really.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Simple after a couple of decades of getting away. Yeah. Mhm.
I think it's funny when you go through all this, and you sit down and you talk to the person, and it's a real simple, okay, we've negotiated, everything's working out, this is the way it is, and then everybody goes, is that it? What the hell do you mean, is that it? Well, you want me to walk around with a rattle and, feathers in my hair and all kinds of shit, or what?
Yeah. Because if you don't walk down the staircase upside down, it doesn't count. That's the deal.
I can't do that shit when there ain't nothing going on. You think I'm going to do it when that's going on yet? I couldn't do that 20 years ago. I ain't going to do it now.
If you throw holy water on them and you see smoke, then you've done it right. Doesn't really matter if you've got the demon out, as long as you get the special effects correct. That's really all that matters. And this is why I don't film my work. It's ridiculous. What is the point? If I sit with someone and in an hour or 4 days they are well, in so much as they're not involved in this connection that they didn't ask for, then we've had a success. I don't walk around with the EVP thing or whatever that's called. I don't listen to the clicking. None of that goes on. I'm not a ghost hunter. I am a sorceress, and I deal with necromancy and demons and the disincarnate and all matters of blood sorcery, whatever is associated with that. It is a science. The things that I'm dealing with are real, so you don't need to be stepping outside of the science of the work. You just need to be really focused on how the work works. And then what happens is both parties, and I want to talk about this for a minute because I feel very strongly that these demons and the disincarnate have their own right to attempt this. And this is where people say, how could you feel that way? Well, let's look at the numbers. I don't know how many billions of people there are on the planet right now, but there are more who have died than are alive. So, therefore, if you accept their presence, that they share this physical space in some way, then we are not the bigger number and we're not in charge. Not that being the bigger number equates to who's in charge, but they have just as much of a right, I hate to use that word because it sounds so silly, but just as much of a right of placement, of power of place that we do. And, demons occur from amalgams of energy which were more often than not created by humans. if you go to a plane crash site, you will see the creation of energy from the chaos that's occurred. But this is a human experience that caused this. So there's always an overlap of some kind, but I feel that they have a right on some level to take a shot at getting what they desire. People like me who are sensible about it and aren't looking for a show about it can come in and negotiate both parties into a better space in which to survive. And, I did want to mention that because that's not really something people talk about. How's the chat room now?
Oh, yeah, energies, we're talking about energy, and it's, what energy is. And one of the questions that actually came up from Victor in the chat room about energy was he asked that you would explain chaos, what chaos is, chaos energy.
Sure.
Your definition of it.
Sure. Thank you, Victor. I appreciate that. Chaos is sort of the microcosm of the amalgam that demons are. Chaos is when something is unpredictable, uncontrollable, unexpected, that which causes inconvenience. When one is a terrible accident, they're in chaos. They exude an energy of confusion, of what I call inconvenience, which is not just, they didn't have it in my size. It means like your life is not going to be the same now. Everything is different. Any event which creates an energy that is uncomfortable to decipher or understand, or energies that conflict with one another. Worry, stress, guilt, these things conflict with the human experience of wanting to move forward and focus. So to me, chaos is not what it is in chaos magic. That's a different study and not one that I'm an expert in. Chaos is the energy that is so multifaceted, comes from so many places, has so much texture that it is not controllable. One cannot if you could take a thread of chaos out of the air, you would not be able to read it in a sentence. It's erratic. It can change at any moment. The wonderful thing about chaos is we use it in the static practice, which puts us in a place where we can therefore throw that which we desire to create or change through that energy and use it to strike the target. Because what chaos will do is chaos will move. So if I was talking to a theoretical physicist, they might say that chaos has something to do with constant movement. And if you think about the language that human beings layer onto that, peace, confusion, those two kinds of words back and forth, then peaceful energy, and I'm using that as close to a scientific word that I can, meaning the stoppage of movement, is not chaos. And energy that is in constant movement and cannot be defined or controlled or utilized in a specific way for long periods of time is chaos. And from that, demons are formed. As that energy sort of builds upon itself and adds to itself, and chaos draws more chaos, crazy draws more crazy. And by that I mean, energy is out of control. This is how people come together and start to all act in a way that they'd never act if they were alone. Chaos is the same kind of energy. It all comes together and it starts to take on some sort of carbon exchange. Powerful demons that are of a high frequency, demons that know how to have cognitive thought, leave black dust behind. The black dust has some sort of carbon base. I don't know exactly what it is yet, working on that. But they do leave that behind. So I think that the best description I could give of chaos is the one that I've given of this unmanageable, ever-moving energy. I hope that does it for you, Victor. I don't know where else to go with that.
No, I think that's a great definition of it.
This is the first time we've been on the air where the answers are causing us to just sit around and go, wait, what did she say? So, when you're getting dead space from your co-host, you know that you're saying stuff that is making people think. I actually think it's a great thing. Go ahead, Mary, you were saying, sorry.
No, that's okay. No, I think, chaos, Victor had posted a thing about ordered energy versus, like random energy, and I think there's a huge difference between the two, and he agreed, he said absolutely, but, chaos is interesting as far as what it draws into us and how we can work with it and get into that void, whereas ordered energy, we're kind of already moving into that void. It is a huge feeling difference. I think it's important to acknowledge the difference in energy. Energy is energy, but there is also specific types of energy. More
yes,
that we kind of focus in on. Mm-hmm.
And you can see how chaos energy would make us, therefore, vulnerable, which leads into possession and habitation and attachment. Because it's constantly moving, so when we're
Very
vulnerable.
True.
I'm sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt you, Mary. I just wanted to throw that in. Chris, any thoughts?
Perfect. I wanted to also let you know.
Go ahead, Mary. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Chris. Go ahead. Make your point, Chris, and I'll jump in.
No. That's fine.
I think we only have a few minutes left to this hour. So, Mary, what were you going to say?
Well, that's what I was going to say. We only have about 5 minutes left, so I want to make sure Chris got his point in, and then,
go ahead,
we can
Chris.
talk about
Get
the
your
Blood
point.
Project.
I did want to say something about the Blood Project. So go ahead, Chris, and then I'll mention the Blood Project because it sort of feeds into this.
What I tell people about chaos, and this really generalizes what you said, but if you ever have been in the middle of an earthquake, that's kind of what chaos would be, because it's that uncertainty that you get. Everything's moving at one time, and it's moving in different directions that you're not exactly used to. It's a total disruption of the normal that people experience.
You know what, Chris? You're absolutely right. I've been in a minor earthquake, and when the ground moved, it just sort of messed with one's understanding of the things that we expect to be rigid and okay. You're absolutely right. That was a brilliant analogy. Thank you for that. Wow, he's absolutely right. I want to just say a little something about the Blood Project, and I know we're running out of time quickly. The Blood Project will start to exist next month. The space is nearly ready, and one of the things that we want to do is be able to sit and talk to the disincarnate and demons as well in a different aspect of the work in the space and create an environment where other people can see them. People who know this project is coming are already talking to me about the fact that they're experiencing possessions and are interested in having that worked on in that space, which is really amazing to me and kind of wonderful. So more data will be available as we go on, utilizing the space in that way, and we can talk more about the things that happen in that space. Towards the end of the summer, the beginning of September even, there will be periods of time where there is a video component to what goes on in there. And again, it might not be what you think it's going to be. It might not be what you see in highly idealized TV versions of the thing, but you'll get the facts and you'll see what goes on. So you can read more about that and find out more about that on my website, which is CagliastroTheIronRing.com. But that's Mary's job. So I would like to thank everybody for participating tonight. So go ahead, Mary, take us out.
Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of the Dark Matters Radio Show with the Sorceress Cagliastro. To reach the Sorceress, find her at CagliastroTheIronRing.com. Chris Rogue Ostrowski can be reached on Facebook, through his email at hellsrogue, H-E-L-S Rogue, @gmail.com. Me, Shotgun Mary, can be reached at theshotgunmary@gmail.com. And make sure to follow us on Facebook at the Dark Matters Radio Show with the Sorceress Cagliastro page. And we're really excited about next week's topic because we will be discussing decoding magnets in sorcery. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Mary. Good night.
Good night.